We've just got to the end of the day of questioning of Monica, who was a environmental activist active in Reclaim the Streets, who was deceived by the undercover police officer Jim Boyling, cover name Jim Sutton, code name Psycho Dream, who deceived her into a relationship for a period of about 6 months, but was also someone she's believed to be a friend for many years whilst she was involved in activism. It's been a very emotional day. We've just got to the end of her questioning. She sort of crescendoed what she had to say at the end by pointing out how psychopathic narcissists rule the world, how it doesn't have to be like this, how it was incredibly powerful. I think she spoke to a feeling that so many of us have who've been involved in activism, who look at where the world has got and how the way in which the sadistic and perverted way in which these undercover police destroyed social movements has ended up. I'm joined by Zoe Young from the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance, and Dave, who was also a Reclaim the Streets activist back in the day. What have both of you made of what we've heard today? Dave, do you want to say what you thought?
Well, it was super moving. I mean, I have watched some of this online. I haven't been to the inquiry since 11 years ago, I think, when I took my 8-year-old daughter then to one day. And I came along this time because I happen to know Jim Boyling Sutton. And my kids actually encouraged me to come along. They said, yeah, Dad, you've got to sort of reconnect with and try and make sense of that time, because it even for someone as peripherally involved and as I was, it's something that ruptured my sense of trust in the everyday way of things, and I think that's part of the kind of wider violence that this surveillance activity and the way in which the predatory nature of it kind of affected quite a lot of people, I think, even those that aren't having the courage to turn up here regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very clear that we always say the impact goes way beyond those of us who are very directly affected, and also, I mean, I think there's the wider thing about the whole of society was affected by this, really, and how it shaped society. Well, Zoe, what did you make of today's proceedings?
Yeah, my God, I mean, I felt just my heart was with her throughout, because I was so much similar, the way she spoke about just feeling a connection with life and not with narcissists being in power, and she was making banners. She didn't see herself as an organizer, and I was like that. I was never really in the core group in RTS, but always there, kind of around the edges, just attending, and then suddenly being chased by the police and like whacked by the police or crushed by the police or things like that, and like witnessing assaults and then having to go to court as a witness and things. And the rupture that you spoke about was at that time, initially, that was like the first level rupture, was the fact that you're there for peace, for justice, for nature protection, for the streets being for people, not for profit and pollution. And then you're suddenly, people are driving vans at you and they're doing that on tax money and they're violent. And then you're all over the papers the next day as if you're the problem. And so that was profoundly disturbing to me as somebody in their 20s. And then, to find out years later that a lot of that impact, a lot of the way that the Reclaim the Streets events were managed was not just these uniformed riot police coming in threatening us, but having a guy right in the middle of the organising, upending things and sort of almost facilitating it so that the event could become more violent. And Monica spoke about Brighton. I was living in Brighton at that time, and we had several Reclaim the Streets parties. I mean, we had one before they even started in London. The first one, I actually thought was a terrible idea. And then I went away, and the rest of the group carried on organising. And I came back and I was like, wow, this is brilliant. It's just like down in the North Lane, and we had bands and a sandpit, and it was lovely. All the families were out and things. Then we had another Reclaim the Streets party, for which this was the poster. It was sort of a beach party with a bit of a sort of situationist approach. They had this line, beneath the paving stones, the beach. And apparently the police were so confused by it, they thought there was a bouncy castle hidden under the shingle, and they actually seized a bouncy castle that the Rotary Club had for a completely separate thing on the day. But I was a legal observer there, and the police just squashed us. It was an early kettle, effectively, and we're all squashed up against the massive glass windows of Infinity Foods. And I remember being absolutely petrified that the glass was going to shatter and we were all going to get really injured. But within the chaos that they created, there was just beautiful moments, like when the pedestrian green man kept changing, and everyone would gather at either side of the road in this completely pedestrianised autonomous zone and shouting, "Green man, green man, green man." And then when the green man appeared, we were, yay! And we all crossed the road and high-fived and hugging and dancing, and then stopped either side again. I mean, it was just, the whole thing was surreal and mad and beautiful, apart from the way the police behaved, which was, as was described today, chasing us around, assaulting people, arresting people, and it was mayhem. And then the way it was just presented, it was all like this, the Battle of Brighton and this sort of thing. And that wasn't us. It wasn't us that were making it a battle. And so to hear these old stories retold through these perspectives that come from having been targeted by a spy cop on that level, as well as everything else that's gone on, the misrepresentation in the media, the demolition of our movements through so many things, whether it's brutalization by the police, whether it's media misrepresentation, everything else. It's been a big day. I'll go quiet for a minute.
Yeah, no, I'm just to go through some of the things that we heard during the last session in terms of the reporting on Monica. She was very clear that her involvement by sort of 98, 99 had like waned off. She attended a few events, but she certainly wasn't involved in organising. Not that she had been hugely involved with organising the whole time, but yet the reports by Jim Boyling on her continue. I mean, so much so we saw a special branch file specifically about her. He gave her own code name, Perpetual Motion, which apparently was used when there was like a wider operation to target somebody. That we even saw a 5-year review in 2005, which is over 5 years since she moved out of London and was no longer involved in activism. And it really shows the way in which that once you're targeted by these undercover police, you're not out until you're dead, basically. Once the registry file's opened on you. I mean, what's interesting, a registry file was opened on her in 1997. Yet in 2005, they're recommending that a registry file is opened on her, which, it kind of shows the way in which this bureaucratic nightmare of the internal machinations of the registry files, they don't even line up very well. Do you know what I mean? They haven't got a handle on their own levels of information they keep. And I thought it was very interesting the way in which, as far as because she was known about, she could be part of this spectre that the undercover police used of these known activists who we've got a handle on. They're doing all these things. They're behind all this sort of behaviour. What did you make of all that?
Yeah, I think that's right. That these women then they're sort of objectified in so many ways in this whole process, and part of that is that they're then sort of useful sort of objects, entities to be just pointed at to emphasize the importance of the sort of spy cops kind of reports. And yeah, it seems that she was not just her, but her father was, being inquired into years after she'd actually retired from activism, and kind of, it felt like retired hurt. And part of that hurt was clearly the way in which she'd seen the police be violent in the face of her hopes for a kind of wider commonality that was trying to do something to save the natural environment. And part of that was, eventually she came to realize, was this man who had shared her bed for 6 months. And at one point, I was very struck when when there was a question about their intimate relationship, and she pulled up at that point and said, "Well, wait a moment. This wasn't, I thought it was intimate at the time, but it was so clearly not that, right?" And she was left, she had an enormous generosity, I thought, actually, as well. There was, so little rushing to judgment
Mm,
and so much painful trying to make sense of
mm,
what had happened to her, what had happened to wider society, that this
Mm.
sort of thing could just have continued and
Mm.
be continuing
Mm.
for so long. It was very moving. So if you haven't seen it, then I haven't had a then hopefully it'll be up online.
It's all online. It's all on
yeah.
YouTube. You can. It's just the audio. That for obvious reasons. Monica has there's anonymity order for her, so you don't get to see what she looks like. But you can hear her words, which her own voice. And I think she speaks incredibly powerfully about the. I mean, there was a whole bunch of questions which, like, kind of are pretty standard now. We can kind of use them at the inquiry about, like, well, how did this make you feel? And for the most part, she kind of was just like, she wasn't interested in sort of talking about her own personal hurt, but much more about, like, kind of what the wider impact of all this, which I always find whenever anybody does that, I find that really powerful in itself, because to take yourself out of the situation and actually talk about the wider issues is a hell of a thing.
And that's part of the nature of activism of this form. It's like you are there for the greater good. That is literally, it's about a dream of a better world. And the way that they presented a report to her that Boiling had submitted about the way an action was supposed to have gone.
The March for Social Justice in 97.
Yeah, where they reclaim the streets, which had started off very much as an environmental thing about streets being for people, stop car culture, individualization, pollution, etc. But over the years, it sort of learned more about the wider world and began to link up with workers' struggles, in particular the Liverpool dockers. And so there was, I think it was a firemen's union and the Liverpool Dockers and Reclaim the Streets together. And that got really badly disrupted. And it seems like Boiling was in the middle of disrupting that. And she was presented live on YouTube with us in the public gallery with this document saying what that event was supposed to have been like. She wasn't in the organising group. She didn't know that until she saw it.
Yeah, I mean,
there.
Again, disclosure that she wasn't getting. I mean, this was a document that she hadn't been disclosed, that though she was part of Reclaim the Streets, and like, it seems like the inquiry simply, like, every time they have an opportunity to disclose things to people, they choose the least amount of distribution. The least number of people they can give a document to is how they will operate. So that she actually gets to see this document, which is a profound event in her own life. It is during giving evidence, which is, I mean, it's just not really. I mean, why on earth are they doing this so badly?
They are supposed to have a trauma-informed approach. They've been doing this for a while now, 10 years plus. They've got the Category H group of women who have been profoundly traumatized, who are endlessly, their lawyers are endlessly like, please just take account of the needs of these people who've received an apology and compensation, but are still being re-traumatized by not only the police, but also by the way the inquiry is running. And that was just an absolutely seminal example that they present her with that document now, when they have had it for how many years? We don't know. I do know that, I mean, I'm part of a group who, having been part of Reclaim the Streets and being core participants, were disclosed a large number of documents, like not long enough ago, because I haven't managed to read all of them or process it at all, but we have actually got to see it. Why on earth was she not given that document at the same time? What the hell?
Yeah, that was 30 years ago. It was mid-April. It was the dying days of the Tory government. And there was this extraordinary moment where you had environmental activists linking up with these locked out dock workers in Liverpool. And the plan, as was relayed for the first time publicly, as far as I'm aware, was and she'd seen for the first time, was for the abandoned Department of the Environment building to be used as a temporary squat and have workshops and claim the space. And there was a large crowd that came along, and Jim Boiling was apparently was one of the group that was supposedly sort of secretly organizing this, but of course he was a police officer. And so that, I think, was a politically traumatic moment for Reclaim the Streets, because it was the moment at which they became, after which they became the focus of especial media and police attention. And thereafter there were I think the police were interested in trying to split the Reclaim the Streets in various ways. But it was also clearly enormously personally traumatic, because it was on that very day of that event that Jim Boiling made his first predatory move against Monica, and then they ended up being in a relationship for 6 months, and this is the first of several relationships that Boiling entered into under terms that, clearly, if any of them had known that he was a police officer, there is no chance that any of those women would have given their consent. So I found that that kind of the kind of concentration of focus on that day, I found that extremely moving, and it's just awful that Monica wasn't provided with some of the the background information about what had Boiling had been doing that day until now. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, just picking up on that thing about the splits. This was a theme we've seen throughout the reports by undercover officers, and that we see there was a whole bunch of them we saw today about him sort of him focusing on highlighting, arguably exaggerating the splits that developed within Reclaim the Streets, the separation between the sort of the core group, of which he painted himself as a part. There were other people who disputed this, and the wider, large open meetings that happened every Tuesday. And this sort of focus on division within groups is something we've seen in all the reports. We saw a lot of it with Lambert. We've seen it. Well, it goes right back. It really goes back to the late 60s. This focus.
Colonial times. I mean, divide and rule.
Well, yeah, but I mean specifically the SDS reports.
Yeah,
the SDS reports by undercover officers. This use of looking for division within groups that can be exploited. And the way in which this information is laid out in these reports, that it can be used by other elements of the police, other elements of the state to further push apart these groups, and destabilize, undermine, and destroy them. Now, throughout this process, we've had the police can be very clear that, it's all about predicting public order issues, countering subversion, but there is no doubt that a big part of their role was undermining, dividing and destroying social movements and preventing them from being effective. And we really saw that in a lot of his reports, particularly those ones later on, after the March for Social Justice, which seems to be he points as being a catalyst for why the group is moving in separate directions, which is quite interesting, because during that time period, I mean, I was politically active at the time, so you had June the 18th, you had those May days, you had November the 30th, you had these really big, spectacular. I use that term on purpose, because the pro situ nature of the spectacle. Yeah, absolutely. The spectacular events, which were, large, joyous, as well as being confrontational in their own way, which were, really had the police on the hop for a little bit. Yet at the same time, his reports is, they're so disorganized, they're all falling apart, they're all turning on each other.
Yeah, I was really noticing in the press reporting, which I've posted on the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance Facebook page. You can have a look at some of the reporting from the time, in the Times, the Mail, the Express, etc. They really focused on this divisiveness, specifically saying that the Reclaim the Streets radical thug environmentalists had hijacked a peaceful trade union march. And that all the nice trade unionists had gone home, and these awful people had come and tried to create disorder. But again and again, I mean, this is something I always say when I come here, is that they keep saying, that the environmental groups, the social justice groups, whatever, are creating disorder, when the reality is always that there is no disorder in the sense of street violence or vandalism, etc., until the police turn up in their riot gear. That is what creates disorder. I was really struck something that Monica said this morning, that so one of the most iconic Reclaim the Streets parties was in July 97 on the M41, really short bit of motorway between Shepherd's Bush Roundabout and the Westway. And that got taken, the whole motorway, very close to the Grenfell Tower and the other tower blocks there. And I mean, that was such a beautiful thing. I remember seeing all the people in the tower blocks like hanging out the windows and calling to each other, going, "Oh my God, look, this sound system down there." And they all come running down and out. And as Monica was saying, you know, there was just a spirit of joy and so much excitement there. And that she saw this policeman next to somebody playing the cello, that amazing Grace. And she said that on the way to that day, the police had said to somebody, one of the activists, "Oh, we're going to be fluffy today." Like fluffy versus spiky was the language that we used at the time. You know, fluffy was when everything was absolutely non-violent. Nobody's going to be breaking any windows. You're going to have people being completely just going floppy or whatever if the police try and attack them or whatever. Whereas spiky is like, at least you might get some self-defense, something like that. So, you know, the police were using our own language and they were making choices whether they were going to be fluffy or spiky. And they clearly made a choice when the environmentalists started getting together with the workers' movements that they were going to get spiky. And that was nothing new for the workers' movements. You know, we'd had the miners' strikes, we'd had the Battle of Orgreave, nothing new for, you know, black communities in London, etc. But for a lot of us, people like me, you know, kind of fairly nice girl from West London, it was like, what the hell? And yeah, so it was an eye-opener, but it was all about dividing us, brutalizing us. And yeah, it was so sad, really, because it was such a beautiful thing. And that's why, you know, Monica becoming emotional when she was seeing what that day together with the Dockers could or should have been like. Yeah.
I mean, I think part of that is the limitations of a hierarchical imagination in encountering anything that is radically democratic. Because, I mean, I remember, yeah, there would be lots of debate, confused debate, excited debate, creative debate happening in Reclaim the Streets meetings. But when that gets turned into a police report, it's very much with the imaginary of formal organizations. You know, there's a core group who are here, and then there is sort of, you know, a rabble who are going to be difficult to organize, or something like this, or are going to be incompetent organizing. So there's a sort of there's a presentation there that isn't able to sort of very easily take on board the openness and the appeal to commonality that that would emerge amidst that kind of slightly chaotic kind of sort of disorganization as a mode of organization. So that's one thing. Another thing is, yeah, as you say, there's some mirroring of the language that is used by activists in these reports, and unfortunately mirroring was also a personal psychological tactic which Monica, with the benefit of hindsight, could see had been deliberately used by this man as a way to gain her trust and to undermine her defenses. And finally, yeah, I think obviously if you were a copper, then you would have an interest in trying to exacerbate splits that in some way were nascent or possible in the organization. And it's not clear to me that, you know, they ever had the sort of simple structure that this Spicott was saying in his reports to his handlers. But I definitely think that accentuating those splits, and in particular putting the pressure of surveillance on, so that the split between trying to organize in a more closed way and in a more open way became a kind of more difficult political question. All of that was just part of a deliberate strategy of repression by the British state. Melancholy. Yeah.
Just picking up what you were saying there about the mirroring and the personal mirroring with Monica. I mean, I think we need to speak on. There was some very raw, very disturbing stuff around the way in which she was manipulated by Boiling. We came in after lunch, and there was some questions about how the relationship ended, how he manipulated her to sleep with him on a further occasion. She said he wanted to, I didn't want to, but I did it because he wanted to. And, you know, there was a lot of those questions about, well, how did that make you feel? Which I always find really kind of just, oh, for fuck's sake, how do you think it makes her feel? And she you know, not good, essentially. And that really kind of just showed the way in which these undercover officers preyed on vulnerabilities and sought out people who are vulnerable in particular states so that they could use them. And I think there's two levels of that using. There's one of the sexual gratification element, but there's also using them as being able to put them in the reports. You know, the fact that she's got her own code name and is singled out for monitoring, but from the reports. And I think these things are going to come up quite a lot when Boyling comes to give evidence next week. He'll be giving evidence between Monday and Thursday next week. There's been a lot made of the way in which why did these undercover officers do this, and why did they use women in these ways? And it's often, it's not just as simple as their personal sexual gratification, but also a further element of like their power and control and their need for control. But also something I was really reminded of things that Bob Lambert said, which really I felt shined a light on his real motivations around the comfort that these women provided him with from the stresses of the job. And I think we got a glimpse of that, you know, that sort of motivation from Boyling as well. Deeply disturbing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, comfort women is a name for women who were sort of turned into sex slaves, Korean women, and wasn't it Japanese soldiers and that, and they've been in struggle. Well, I mean, presumably they're all died now, but I remember for generations, decades, they were in struggle to try and get some justice. This idea, you know, the Joy Division within the German Nazi situation. There's nothing new to it, but it is never, ever okay.
The radical lack of consent here. The radical lack of consent here is an additional thing. The fact that the relationship from one side was predicated upon an assumption of shared values, and on the other side was an utterly cynical manipulation that went right to the core of how a human being could be and could try and express values.
Absolutely, no, you're very right, and thank you for adding that. I think it's this illusion of freedom that we have, you know, that we think we're making choices, but in fact we're being manipulated in ways we can't even see. I mean, and the mirroring that you talked about, I mean, I've heard evidence from some of the other spy cops and some of the other women who were abused like this, is that one spy cop would be gathering data about all the people they were spying on, and then the next one to come in would then use that. It's like, oh, so-and-so likes this band, or so-and-so used to live there. And then they would use that as part of their mirroring, helping people feel that they've met their soulmate and things like that.
Yeah, deeply disturbing stuff. We will have more tomorrow. There is Roger Geffin and GRD, both of whom were Reclaim the Streets activists, who will be giving more evidence about the infiltration of Reclaim the Streets in general. Rosa, who was also deceived into a long-term intimate relationship, much longer-term intimate relationship by Jim Boyling, who she had 2 children by, won't be giving evidence on Thursday as was initially planned, and may still be on the website as listed. That won't be happening, at least not now, possibly later. It's unclear. Yeah,
I mean, I completely understand. She's really had it rough. And this inquiry is not trauma-informed sufficiently to protect somebody in her position, I would say. And I completely support her making that decision on that basis. So I just wanted to say a little bit about this idea of Reclaim the Streets having a statement. Anyone who is involved knows that you cannot represent Reclaim the Streets. It's like the streets. It's full of a whole diversity of perspectives and voices, and it's kind of random, the fact that a group of, I don't know, how many are we, 8 or 9, landed up being core participants in this inquiry, which means that we have legal representation, which means that we get to see some of the evidence sometimes before other people do, and means that we have a barrister who makes kind of opening statements, and it means that we have been able as a group to draw up this kind of quite long and substantial sort of statement, but we do not in any way claim or aspire to be representing Reclaim the Streets at all. And something that we're going to be doing is trying to do a few more podcasts, maybe giving Tom a break. We're going to try and do it between ourselves a bit, because he worked so hard, and buy him a coffee and that sort of thing.
And there's no heavy lifting, so it doesn't really count as hard work.
But seriously, give this man a coffee. So yeah, we're going to try and do a bit of sort of intro to Reclaim the Streets, a bit more about what was happening back then, and also talking about its relationship with other groups. For example, Reclaim the Streets London essentially sort of emerged out of the London Group of Earth First, and it also led into the London Group of Independent Media Centre, otherwise known as Indie Media. And neither of these have status in the inquiry, but several of us who are here were involved in both of those. So that's something that we're trying to draw out through this mysterious position that we have of being involved in the inquiry through the name of Reclaim the Streets. So just look out for that. We're going to be trying to put out more material. We're going to be getting together, and the next couple of weeks, it's going to be Reclaim the Streets sort of all the way, and things that came out of and were associated with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting the way in which the inquiry has designated some groups as co-participants, others not. I mean, it's very strange. Earth First isn't a co-participant. I mean, we heard a lot about some stuff about an Earth First summer gathering in Strathclyde in '97. I think that those summer gatherings really became like an entry point for a lot of the undercover officers. Certainly, I met Michael Jacobs at Earth First summer gathering. Plenty of other people talk about meeting the undercover cops the first time at those events.
They were like little mini festivals in a way, a bit like the Greenfield sometimes in parts of Glastonbury, or the Big Green Gathering as was, which may or may not, probably was demolished as a result of Spy Cop information. Mark Kennedy, we'll come to that later. But, much more focused. It was a skill shares, it was workshops. I mean, Mark Kennedy, he was running activist security workshops at them. Anyway, let's not go there. Earth First should have been in the inquiry. Independent media centres should have been in the inquiry. We're going to try and bring them in best we can. And just people who were involved, come along, come down, come and be part of these conversations, come and listen to the evidence that's being heard, and come and be on Tom's thing, because he always wants more people.
Please. I mean, I often it's the same people every time on these videos, so more variety, the better. We've had some comments. Just to highlight that. So Bristol KRS, intense and moving day of evidence from Monica. Much love, solidarity to her. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really, we must underline how powerful Monica's evidence was, and total solidarity with her in every way. Do you want to add something?
No, only to say, absolutely. So much dignity in her and the other women who've, been fighting here, but also all the court participants. I know you're not trying to represent groups in an impossible way, but it's also awesome that you've put the hours in. I mean, I've not done that, but I'm so grateful, and I know that there will be lots of other people around the periphery of these movements, or simply people for whom that moment in time promised another future that we never got to get, but that we still hold in our hearts as something that is a possibility that we have to look for in other moments in our lives. So, thank you guys.
Cheers. I mean, that's a beautiful thing to end on. We'll be back again tomorrow with Roger Gafford and JRD giving evidence. That'll be the last hearing of the week. Is there anything else either of you would like to add? I won't be doing the Twitter Spaces again this evening. I've stopped doing the Twitter Spaces. I'm sorry about that. I might do a podcast of the week at the weekend. I'll see how it goes. Depends on the workload, really. There's only so much. Yeah, please do feel free to buy me a coffee if you'd like to. The link will be somewhere. I mean, just Tom B. Fowley will find me. Whatever.
You can also buy him lunch if you come down.
Yeah, we're more than welcome.
Because he's so busy, he can't get out for lunch.
If anybody wants to shove any £10 notes in my hand, you're more than welcome. All right, thanks for joining us, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye for now.
Good night.